that will do so many things for us. It will deepen our faith. And then you'll be able to pass on a deeper faith to your kids. It will help you to navigate a crazy, chaotic world.
So a friend of ours at Maven, actually, she's more than a friend. She is on our staff here at Maven, Maggie Hendrick, and she also writes for Women in Apologetics. But Maggie wrote a great article on the Women in Apologetics website. We are going to link to that article in the show notes because we think it's important for you to read. But one thing that we loved that Maggie said in her article on this topic, which I should say the name of the article, it's called Discerning Culture's Subtle Messages Using Truth and Logic. And so Maggie's going to walk you through in this article some of the subtle messages that we get, and she goes after the area of home decor, which is really good. And you think, oh, wow, there's even subtle lies in home decor. It's crazy. So anyway, you have to read the article.
That should pique our readers' interest right there.
But towards the end of the article, she said something that she does with her kids that I had no idea. We've been friends with them for years, but she says that she pays her children $1 if they can detect a lie in the culture and then explain to her what the lie is. And then she'll pay them $1. And I loved that idea because talk about motivating our kids to start really looking around at messages that are maybe on a billboard or on a sign or in a school homework assignment. She gives an example of that with her son in a homework assignment he got.
Which it reminds me of, kind of what we've done when we've been on road trips. Mm-hmm. Sometimes when you're on a road trip, it's just so easy to let your kids be on screens the whole trip. And we've tried to fight against that. Mm-hmm. And so when we've gone to like a place like Yellowstone, I remember we wanted the kids looking out at the beautiful landscape and also looking to see what animals they might spot. Obviously, there's amazing wildlife in Yellowstone. So what we did was we kind of created this tiered system of like, okay, what's the most common animal? Like, an elk. Okay, $1 if you see an elk. $2 if you see, a bison.
I think we ended up taking the elk one off the table because
there was too
many of them.
Yeah.
We're like,
no,
okay.
It was
the first elk.
One
whoever saw the first one, yeah.
And it's $5 for a bear because it was more rare. But the whole point was to get them looking around. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the same thing. Maggie's saying, hey, she motivates her kids to look around. She incentivizes it. So, and like we've said in the past, we're all for incentivizing your kids. And so, yeah, it's the same kind of principle. And it's a good tool to get them to then start kind of spotting these lies that the culture is trying to tell us.
So on the topic of lies and things that will be said out in the culture. For this episode, this is now our fourth one on critical thinking. We thought we would just go through some specific challenges that are put up against us as Christians in the culture and then talk through refuting them, how to think about them.
Yeah, and we wanted to tie these into some of the logical fallacies that we went over in the last podcast. Mm-hmm. Because that may have been a little bit dry for some people, but it was just necessary to kind of lay out what these are and try to get an understanding of them. So now we want to help you see how those play out in real live objections.
Okay, so we're just going to go through some challenges, Brett. I'm going to read them, and then I'm not going to let you look at the answers that I've written out.
Oh, you're going to role play here? You're going to be the skeptic? You
I'm
play the skeptic really well. It just kind of comes natural to you, Erin.
Okay, so first challenge, Brett. So what do you say when atheists at Berkeley that we take our students to, and they say, the Bible is full of errors and contradictions?
Okay, so that is where I think we go back a couple of podcasts, not to the logical fallacy, but to the questions. So what you want to help your kids see here, and what we want to see, is that this person is making a claim, right? The Bible is filled with errors. The Bible has contradictions. Now, when you make a claim, generally speaking, the burden of proof is on you. That means you also need to support the claim. Otherwise, I don't have any obligation to simply accept your claim. You can make all the claims you want, doesn't mean they're true. And so this is where we would want to get our young people in the habit of asking that second question that we taught, right? The why question. Why do you believe that? Or how did you come to that conclusion? What's the evidence for that claim? And specifically, if someone says, yeah, there's all kinds of errors in the Bible, my first response is going to be, okay, what errors are you talking about? Where are these errors? So actually, you can use both those two questions that we talked about 2 episodes ago, the what and the why. The what question, the why question. What do you mean and why do you believe that? So what do you mean by error, or where's the contradiction? Can you show me the evidence for this? And look, people, again, they can make all kinds of claims, but if they say that the Bible has all kinds of errors and then they can't show you a single one or an alleged error, then I don't really need to go a whole lot further. You kind of defang that objection just by asking questions.
Yeah. And I love when we train students in this and then send them out in conversations and they come back really excited because they realize that the burden of proof isn't always on them. And that when they just start asking these questions, what do you mean by that? Why do you think that? And they follow someone to their logical conclusion, or they see that this college student that they were in a conversation with doesn't really have a lot to say.
Yeah.
They realize they don't have to have every single answer to every single challenge, that sometimes just knowing the right questions to ask is enough to have a really good conversation with somebody.
Yeah.
So, okay, next challenge. Christianity is responsible for some of the worst evils the world has ever seen.
Okay, so that one, again, we go back to our questions. And I mean, I might jump right into the why question. Why do you believe that? What examples are you referring to? Can you give me the historical moments or the historical events that you're referring to? And first, put the burden of proof back on the person to support their claim that Christianity is responsible for the worst evils. And one thing that's helpful here is knowing a little bit of history so that you can combat such claims, right? So first, put the burden of proof on them, but then if you have just done some examination on the 20th century and you look at the greatest amount of bloodshed that took place in the 20th century, it was not for religious causes. It wasn't religion. It wasn't Christianity that caused those things. You look at Hitler. You look at Stalin in Russia. You look at Mao in China. Just those 3 right there. Probably 100 million dead bodies under the leadership of these men who were atheistic in their views. Of course, yes, Hitler maybe 20 years prior to World War II, he's got some Catholic roots, but it certainly, when you look at Mein Kampf, you can see that it's not his love of the Christian faith that's motivating him.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but what you see is 100 million dead under atheism. Atheism, secularism has been the cause of most of the bloodshed in human history. And look, are there some bad examples in Christian history? Yeah, and we should own up to those. But they're nothing. They're nothing like the gravity of these other things. So take the Crusades. Estimates on the Crusades are maybe 200, 300,000 people who died. And it's a complicated history in terms of what was going on. Christians surely did things that were illegitimate, not consistent with the Christian faith. But 300,000 dead bodies versus 100 million, that's a big difference. Again, both tragic. Every dead body is tragic, but it's not, it's a misapplication of the Christian faith. But you can make an argument that secularism, this is just the logical outworking of secularism. When there is no God, then whoever's got the power can do what they want. So all that to say is start with the questioning there, and put the burden of proof on someone to give you some data on that. But what's good to know is that, hey, the data actually is in favor of Christianity on this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so another challenge that we will often hear is someone saying, basically, I don't believe anything unless it can be proven scientifically. Like science is the measure of all truth.
Okay, so in the last episode, we talked about contradictions. There are self-refuting claims that will defeat themselves. This is an example of one of those. Mm-hmm. All right, so take the claim, I don't believe anything unless it can be proven scientifically. Okay, so it lays out this criterion, and you want to say, does that criterion apply to the statement itself? Meaning, okay, I don't believe anything unless it can be proven scientifically. Question is that itself a belief? Yes, that is a belief. The belief that I don't believe anything unless it can be proven scientifically. I won't accept anything unless it can be proven scientifically. That is a belief. So guess what? This criterion applies to that statement itself. And the question would be, okay, the statement, I can't believe anything unless it's proven scientifically. How did you prove that statement scientifically? You can't prove that scientifically. It's not a scientific claim. That's a philosophical claim. That philosophical claim you come to the table with, that you come to your science with that belief before you've done any science. So you didn't justify it through some kind of scientific method. And so that's an example of a claim defeating itself.
Okay, so on that topic of believing only the things that can be proven scientifically, this science is the main measure of truth. What about this objection? There is no truth.
Yeah, I've heard a couple of college freshmen, I think, utter that one. But gosh, we live in a culture that it attacks truth in all kinds of different ways. So I'm going to kind of expand your objection here. Sometimes it comes in the form of, well, there's no truth, or sometimes it's all truth is relative, or nobody really has the corner on truth, or all truth is socially constructed, right? So these are all different ways of saying very similar things. They're all self-defeating, right? And you can highlight this by, again, saying, let's apply this to itself to kind of surface the contradiction, right? So there is no truth. And that's a good one to start with your kids, because they can see this one. There is no truth. Let me ask you a question. Is that true, right? Is it true that there is no truth? Because if it's true that there is no truth, it's also false that there is no truth, right? You see the contradiction. Okay, all truth is relative. Is that claim, is that truth relative, meaning it's relative to each individual who believes it? Or are you saying that applies to everyone? Because it sure sounds like you're saying that truth, that all truth is relative, is universal. That applies to everyone.
Yeah, what about the social construction one? Because that's definitely this social construct.
That's the language we're hearing.
The language that's really popular right now.
Yeah, so truth is just a social construct. Okay, apply that to itself. Is the idea that truth is just a social construct itself a social construct? Meaning, and what do we mean by social construct? It just means that it's kind of determined by the culture. It's decided by us. And so the idea that truth is a social construct, is that just decided by us? And that we could have decided it some other way, or we can eventually change it because social constructs are changing.
Yeah, you just go out of whatever culture you're in and then go to a different, and they could have completely different social constructs.
Yeah, and that's if culture is the one that's doing the constructing. It could be individuals, right? That's where we're at, where I construct my own gender identity, and that's the claim of trans ideology, is that gender is a social construct, right? Now, but if someone says truth is, that's self-defeating.
Yeah. Okay. What about this one about, and we've worked with junior high and high school students that have struggled with this one, but there are millions of people who belong to other religions. So there can't possibly be one true religion.
Yeah,
There's just too many.
That's an objection people use often, where they'll appeal to either the disagreement that people have over religious belief, or they'll point to all of the other people who believe something different. And then notice, what's the conclusion they draw from that? The conclusion is, therefore, there can't be some exclusive truth. Jesus can't be the only way, right? All right, go back to episode 3 on this critical thinking series. We mentioned a logical fallacy. The logical fallacy is it's a non sequitur. That's what you've got here. And in fact, here's a question that you want to maybe learn how to ask or teach your kids how to ask. And the question is, so what follows? So what? Of course, you don't want to ask it with attitude. Don't teach your kids how to ask that with attitude.
Don't teach your kids to say,
so what, Mom? So
That'll
what follows? What follows is really the question. From your facts, and going back to the definition of a non sequitur, it's when a conclusion or a statement doesn't follow from the facts or the statements that you've presented here. So the argument here is, hey, there are all these people who disagree on religion. Not everyone's a Christian. Not everyone believes what you believe. Therefore, there can't just be one exclusive truth when it comes to religion. That is a non sequitur. That doesn't follow. It doesn't follow that because many people have differing views, that there can't be one right view. And this is where counterexamples are helpful to illustrate this. And so let's go back to my example of, 2 + 2 = 4, right? So Miss Crabapple teaches us that as kindergartners. But not everybody in the class agrees. All these little kindergartners start arguing over what the right answer is. And some are suggesting the right answer is 3, and some are suggesting the right answer is 5. And so Miss Crabapple starts writing up all the possible answers on the board there. And so let's say she's got 10 different answers. These are 10 possible answers to the equation 2 + 2 = blank. She doesn't then throw her hands up and say something like, "Oh, we just can't know. There's just too many possible answers," right? No, just because there's disagreement doesn't mean there's not a right answer. Another example might be the shape of the earth. There's lots of debate over the shape of the earth. And you thought that was a thing of the past? No. Go talk to the modern day Flat Earth Society, and they will debate with you. Look, people think there are different shapes, to the earth, and there's disagreement on that. It doesn't follow that there's not a correct answer. So this kind of objection commits a non sequitur.
I think underneath it too is just this idea like all these people can't be wrong, and so you would have to answer why all those people couldn't be wrong. Why can't all these people actually be wrong?
Yeah, well, I think Christians are probably we've gotten too uncomfortable with that.
Yeah.
We don't want, and of course there's a good impulse there of wanting to be gracious and kind, but we have to be truthful. And if someone is wrong about their religious views, no matter how sincerely they hold them, we want them to know. And that's actually the loving thing to do, is to confront false ideas. Jesus did this all the time in the Gospels. He would not let people, simply walk away without, confronting some of their false ideas, whether it's the rich young ruler, the woman at the well, or the religious leaders of his day. So we've got to be more comfortable with graciously, gently, but firmly standing for the truth. And if that means trying to point out to someone that their views about Jesus or about God or about religion are wrong, we want them to acknowledge that. And of course, again, lots of grace there, but engaging intelligently, and it takes time. It's not just winning an argument. That's not what we're talking about here. But I think we have to be comfortable with there being kind of those conflicts.
It sounds like you're just really narrow-minded.
Well, what do you mean by narrow-minded, Erin?
Well, that's an objection that we hear is, aren't you Christians just narrow-minded? Because what you're describing, all these people being wrong and telling people that they're wrong in what they believe, sounds really narrow-minded.
Yeah. So what do you mean by narrow-minded, Erin? Which
like
is
saying there's one way that's so narrow.
Okay. And so you're saying, is it wrong to say that there's only one way?
Yes, people would say that.
So then what's the right view?
That there's lots of ways.
Okay. So that there are lots of paths that lead to God. That's also a claim that you're making, which is exclusive. That excludes my view.
Yes, I'm excluding your view.
So then you're narrow-minded also. Hey, welcome to the narrow-minded
Well, I'm
club.
open-minded except for your idea. But every other idea is fine.
You play the skeptic really well. But notice what I'm doing there. But
this narrow-minded argument is a big one in the culture. They might not say narrow-minded. This is where the bigot word comes in. Oh, that's a more popular
the
term.
phobe word.
Yeah.
Homophobe, transphobe.
Yeah. So that's underneath that is like you're super narrow-minded and you just think your way is right.
Yeah. So what I did there was just my first step was to ask the what do you mean by that question, right? The clarification question. Like what? Okay, what does this mean, this term narrow-minded? What we didn't get to, and I didn't want to do it on camera and kind of confront you on this, but the second thing you can point out is that terms like narrow-minded or bigot or homophobe, those are examples of name calling. So what's the logical fallacy? It's an ad hominem. So I make a claim, whether it's along some moral view, or I make a claim about the exclusive nature of Jesus, and then someone responds, oh, you're narrow-minded. Notice what they're doing. They're not dealing with your argument. They're not dealing with your reasons. They're not dealing with your claim. Instead, they are
Calling
going
you a
for
name.
you, right, against the man or to the man. They are calling you a name. It's just a sophisticated way to call people names. And so it really sidesteps the issue. It's an ad hominem. And so, again, you can engage that by asking first, what do you mean by that? Because sometimes, especially when they try to undermine you for being narrow-minded or something like that, what you find is the claim that they're making actually applies to them as well, right? Well, you're narrow-minded. You think you're right, and everyone else is wrong. Well, here's an example where this person thinks you're wrong and they're right. Right. And look, I have no problem with that. It's okay. I don't get offended if someone thinks I'm wrong. We shouldn't get offended if someone thinks we're wrong, because we think they're wrong, and we don't want them to take offense and just shut the conversation down.
Yeah.
So that would be starting with maybe clarifying or sometimes pointing out that this is name calling. And I have a story on this one. Years ago, when I used to work in a restaurant. And I think this was between jobs, and I was picking up extra jobs at a fine dining restaurant to kind of make ends meet for the family. And it was a French restaurant here in Southern California, fine dining. And one of the waiters was actually a French guy. His name was Maurice. and love the guy. We got along really well. We would engage all the time, and we just, kind of both easygoing personalities. And Maurice, this French guy, loved to talk politics. And he found out I was a Christian. And so he held views almost, diametrically opposed to mine, but he always wanted to talk. And one night we were sitting in the restaurant after our shift. Restaurant was closed down. And I think we were doing some closing work, and he and I were doing something together. We start talking, and he brings up the issue of abortion. We start talking about abortion, and I start laying out some of my views. And I remember midway through that conversation, Maurice looks at me, and in his deep French accent, he kind of shakes his head like, "Oh, Brett, for being so young, you are so narrow-minded," and he called me narrow-minded. And so at that moment, I thought, I have a good enough relationship with Maurice. I can kind of call him out on this. And I said, "Now, Maurice," I said, "I want you to notice what just happened. You brought up the issue of abortion. You asked me what my views were. I gave you my views, and I started to give you some arguments, reasons why I think this." I said, "You didn't say anything in response to my reasoning. Instead, you just looked at me and you said, 'I'm narrow-minded.'" I go, "Maurice, that's just calling me a name. Notice you didn't deal with my argument." And he was thoughtful. And I remember he looked up at the ceiling and he's like, oh, you're right. And he was, I think I was gracious enough. I didn't put him on the defense, but he's like, "You're right. And then he started apologizing to me. He's like, "I'm so sorry I called you a name." And I said, "It's no problem, but let's keep talking about this topic. It's a really important topic." And so you can do that. And hopefully someone can be responsive to it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Last question, last challenge that we'll go through, because I think we've gone through a good amount to get people thinking. But okay, in the last podcast, I brought up the challenge that we will get sometimes. And it's basically, you're a Christian or your kids are Christian because they grew up in a Christian home. And if they grew up in a Muslim home, they'd be Muslim. If they grew up in an atheist home, they'd be atheist. So the only reason you're a Christian, the only reason your kids are Christian is because they grew up in a Christian home.
Yeah. Okay, so notice what the objection is trying to do. It's trying to discredit the Christian faith on the basis of its origin, where your Christian faith came from. You grew up in a Christian home. Oh, it's what your mom and dad taught you. Okay, there's a couple of things to notice here. Number one, that's a logical fallacy. It is the genetic fallacy, right? You cannot discredit a view. You can't show that a view is false based upon where it comes from. Okay, so yeah, maybe my belief originates with my parents who taught me the Christian faith. That says nothing about whether the belief is true or false. So it's the genetic fallacy. Notice it also is a kind of a sociological claim and doesn't deal with the rationality of a claim. Look, rationality helps us to know whether things are true or false. Sociological claims are just what's true about a culture, or what are the beliefs or the ideas or whatever, the influences in a culture. But I can't assess the sociology of a belief like this and then tell you that the belief is true or false, okay? And then thirdly, notice this would you could discredit anybody's religion or anybody's view. So look, there are places in Europe where atheism is predominant. You go to some of the Scandinavian countries. So let's say you go to Norway and the majority of the country are unbelievers or atheists, and your parents were atheists and they passed on atheism to you. Well, in the same way, then we could discredit your atheism. You could say, well, you just grew up in an atheist home and that's why you believe atheism. Or you could do the same thing to the Muslim who grew up in Saudi Arabia, or the Hindu who grew up in India, or the Buddhist who grew up in Vietnam. You could discredit every view that way, but it's an illegitimate way to discredit views. It's the genetic fallacy. Mm-hmm. And so it's really irrelevant how I came to my views. The question is, are my views true or false?
Yeah, and I think hopefully this was helpful for you to listen through, because these are challenges that if you are having conversations with non-believers, these are challenges you're going to hear. And hopefully you are having conversations, and hopefully you're having conversations in front of your kids.
Yeah.
Because like we talked about, this felt need of when you allow your kids, your students, to hear from people who think differently, you will help them to think through ideas by not only modeling yourself how to engage in conversation, but then, seeing how conversations go, seeing what reasons people give for their beliefs. And it's a way to train our kids to be faithful followers of Christ and to love God with their mind. And the best way, one of the best ways to do that, of course, is through modeling, having these kinds of conversations and interacting with challenges to the Christian faith.
Yeah, one really good resource for your teenagers is this one right here. It's the Apologetics Study Bible for Students. And I was one of the associate editors for this. And there's a section in here on different tactics, which we're really covering some of the logical fallacies that we've done over the last 2 episodes. And so I think we include about 25 of those throughout the Bible. Plus, there are different apologetic articles in here that make different arguments. This is a really good resource for teenagers that includes a lot of apologetic material, of course, interspersed within the scriptures. So a good Bible for students. Okay, that I think wraps up a good 4 podcasts on critical thinking. We gave that amount of time to this topic because it's so important, and the church has fallen down on this. And, when we look at the history of Christianity over the last 2,000 years, we see incredible models for us. This is where it's important to pull ourselves out of the 21st century. If all you are reading is 21st century Christians, stop, put some of those books down, and go read some old Christians. In fact, C.S. Lewis talks about doing that. Read some old Christians, get out of this century, and see some of the rich tradition, the intellectual tradition of the Christian faith that will do so many things for us. It will deepen our faith, and then you'll be able to pass on a deeper faith to your kids. It will help you to navigate a crazy, chaotic world with more confidence. It will help you to be salt and light and help your kids to be salt and light. Yeah. It will help preserve your kids' faith by bolstering it, by giving them the resources to withstand all of the different rational attacks, the intellectual attacks that they're going to have to navigate. So many benefits to this, and through it all, it helps us to love God with our minds and love Him in a very important way. Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.